Hi, this is Sarah from Waves and Wilds and welcome to another video. In this video, I'm going to take you through the whole process of sewing the Sandcastle bucket hat. We did actually release a video for the Sandcastle bucket hat a couple of years ago, but it only featured certain steps, and we did that just because they were the steps that we got the most questions about in the Facebook group. And so I thought that that would be useful just to explain those few steps. However, as soon as we uploaded that video, we got loads of requests. Oh, can we have one for the whole process? Where's the rest of the video? So finally, I'm getting around to doing this for you. This is going to take you through the entire process from the pattern all the way through to top stitching at the end. So a few things to think about before we start. You need two fabrics for this one. These are the fabrics that my 11-year-old has picked out. They need to be woven. You can make this pattern out of knit fabrics, and I have done so. And in fact, the one on the front cover is made out of jersey, but it does take a little adjusting. A jersey hat is going to be a lot floppier. It is going to fit a lot larger, and it's just a little bit more challenging to get it quite right. So the best fabric to use for this pattern is woven and a sort of light to medium weight, more in the medium, I'd say. Something like a quilting cotton is a nice weight for doing this. If it's too light, then you end up with a very floppy hat. But if it's too stiff, then it's harder to sew and you end up with a very rigid hat. So I've got my two fabrics here. A couple of things to look at on the pattern pieces. If I bring them up here to show you, you can see that there are these little marks here, these little notches, and you get other marks on the brim, and then there's the same on the side. You need to transfer all of those marks onto your fabric. I prefer to do this by using an erasable dressmaking pen, such as this. I just find that easier than trying to cut out notches. You can really carefully cut a notch into your fabric, but you need to be aware that there's only a 10mm or a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So you need to make sure that anything you cut into your fabric is smaller than that. So it's not going to interfere with your seam allowance, or you can cut your notches the other way. So what I mean is, if the notches are this way on the pattern piece, when you get to that section, you cut a sticking out notch. And that's an option if you don't have a dressmaking pen, or alternatively, you can just stick a pin in that section. The important thing is not how you mark these spots, it's just that you do mark them. And that's because it's going to make your life a lot easier when you are putting the pieces together. This is not a complex pattern in the sense that there are only 3 pattern pieces and there are not a whole heap of steps, but it is a little bit challenging because it is all curves. And when you're attaching this kind of curve to this kind of curve to this kind of curve, there are some challenges involved with that. And just one thing to make your life easier is making sure you have all of these markings on your fabric, because they will help you line things up better. Now, this pattern does recommend using interfacing. Where and when you use it is kind of up to you. If you're using a very light floppy fabric, then I would probably put a lightweight interfacing on every single piece with perhaps a medium on the brim. This is a slightly heavier weight woven, so I'm only going to interface the brim, and I'm only going to interface one of them. You have an outer and you have a lining, although it's reversible, so it could be either way. I'm only going to interface one because I think that that will be enough. There's 2 ways to do this. So this is my brim piece. The most sort of efficient and economical way to do it would be to cut out my 2 brim pieces from my fabric and then 2 brim pieces from my interfacing and then fuse them together at that point. However, I'm a big fan of doing things the quickest and the easiest way. So I have in fact applied a larger piece of interfacing here to one of my fabrics, and I will then go ahead and cut out my brim pieces from that. I just find that much easier to do. It uses a little more interfacing, but I've like I say, I'm a big fan of doing things the quickest and the easiest way. Now, this is a directional fabric, as you can see, so I'm just going to have to be a little more conscious of how I place my pattern pieces on the fabric to try and get the best result. Brim, obviously it goes all the way round your head, so there's no way for these figures to be the correct way, whichever way you're looking at it. But I will at least make sure that I'm not intentionally putting them upside down. So I will go ahead and cut out my pieces now. You need to cut out 2 brims, 1 hat top, and 2 hat sides from each of your fabrics. So you'll have 2 fabrics. Like I say, it's a reversible pattern, so technically there's no outer and no inner. But for the sake of clarity, I will use this Minecraft fabric as my outer, and I will use this plain grey as my inner fabric. And then I'll leave it up to Jack to see actually which one he likes to wear on the inside and the outside. And here are all the pattern pieces you're going to need. So I've got 2 inner brims, 2 outer brims, 1 of each hat top, and 2 inner sides and 2 outer sides. So the first parts that we're going to use are the brim pieces. So I'm going to start off with my outer brim and just pop my inner brim to the side, but I will be using it in just a moment. So you want to take your 2 brim pieces and place them right sides facing and pin and sew along these 2 shorter edges here. And then you will do the same with your 2 lining brim pieces. Place them right sides facing and pin and sew along the 2 shorter edges. This pattern uses a 10mm or a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and you can just use a regular straight stitch for this. I tend not to finish my seams on this one because everything is enclosed, and so they're not going to fray and cause a problem in that way. So just a regular 10mm 3/8 of an inch seam allowance with a straight stitch along the 2 short edges on your brim pieces. I have now sewn my 2 brims, and I now have these sort of 2 donut shapes. I have also pressed the seam allowance open, and that just means that when I place the outer brim and the inner brim together, I'm going to have less bulk and just a nicer finish in that area. The next thing you need to do is you need to place your outer and your inner brim right sides facing and pin around the entire outside edge. Now you want to match up the seams. So the 2 spots where you have joined your brim pieces together, you want to line them up and one on top of each other, and then just pin around the entire outside edge. It's worth noting that your brim will not lie flat against a table at this point. That's because the brim is not designed to stick out at exactly 90 degrees from the main body of the hat. It's designed to slope downwards a little. So they won't lie flat, but they will fit perfectly against each other because you use the same pattern piece to cut all of your brim pieces out, so they will match each other perfectly. The next thing to do is to go and sew around that entire outside edge, again using a straight stitch and a 3/8 of an inch 10mm seam allowance. Now we are eventually going to turn this brim the right way out, and when we do that, this curve wants to sit really nice and smoothly. And so to help us achieve that lovely smooth curve, we need to cut in some notches into the seam allowance. Now I have got pinking shears, which allow me to cut a sort of a zigzag edge really easily, and that works well for this pattern. If you don't, you can just get regular scissors and just cut little notches into the seam allowance. It takes a little longer, but you will achieve the exact same thing. You want to be getting close to your stitching line, but you don't want to be right up against it or even super close to it, because then you could risk the fabric fraying a little, and then your seam will be compromised and it will start to fall apart. So you want to go around your entire outside edge and cut some notches into it now. Once you have cut those notches, you want to turn your brim the right way out, and then you want to push that curve until it's sitting really nice and smoothly, and then give it a really good press. So after it's had a good press, my brim is looking lovely and smooth. And the final step for creating our brim is to top stitch it. So at the absolute minimum, you need to top stitch around the outside edge. You can top stitch between 6mm, 1/4 of an inch, and 10mm, 3/8 of an inch from the edge, just to give it a sharp finish around the edge. But ideally, you want to sew multiple lines of top stitching, one inside the other, to give the brim structure and also to give it that traditional bucket hat finish. So I'm going to go do my top stitching now. Once you've top stitched your brim, it should look pretty smart with all those lines of top stitching on it. And that is ready to add to the rest of your hat. So we're going to place that to one side for a moment while we construct the rest of the hat. So you're going to need your hat side pieces. You should have two pairs. You should have a pair of lining pieces and a pair of outer pieces. You need to place them right sides facing. And just like we did with the brim, you're going to pin and sew these short ends here. So I'm going to sew along the short ends of each of my hat sides using the same 10mm 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And once I have sewn them, I'm going to press those seams open just like I did on the brim. So you should now have 2 rings of fabric created by your hat side pieces, and you should have pressed those seams open. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to attach the hat top, and I'm not going to lie, this is the most fiddly part. It is not difficult, it is just a little bit fiddly. On your hat side pieces, you should have marked or clipped notches at the top here. There should be one on this side and one on this side. I used a dressmaking pen just to place a little mark for mine. You may have put a pin or you may have clipped yours, but whatever method you have used, you should have marks, 2 on the top of your hat pieces and 4 on your hat top circle. 2 of them are going to match up with your side seams and 2 of them are going to match up with the notches. So I'm going to start with my side seam, and the little arrow marker from the hat top matches up with those side seams. And then I'm going to match up the notches on the hat top with the notches on the hat side. So the next thing I'm going to do is I've now marked my quarter points. I'm now going to go ahead and place a pin halfway between each quarter point, essentially marking the 8th points. And then after I've done that, I'm going to place a pin in between each of those. So you're going to end up with a whole heap of pins up here, and you're just going to take each section one at a time, find the center point, pin that, and move on to the next. Find the center point, pin that, move on to the next. When you are attaching curves in this manner, you will generally have to ease your fabric a little. Now, easing means to sort of persuade your fabric into place. You are not stretching it. You are just putting a little more tension into one layer and a little less tension into the other layer to persuade them into place. And this step is one that comes up in the Facebook group all the time, and people are like, oh, the top doesn't fit and I can't get it to work and things like that. And I can assure you it does. And this pattern has been tested more than any other pattern that I've put out. And I have made countless hats, and I can assure you it absolutely does work. It's just perhaps not what you expect. Okay, you are having to ease those layers into place. You are working with 2 different curves. And also you have to remember that it's not the raw edges that you actually need to match. It's 10mm, 3/8 of an inch inside the raw edges where you're going to be sewing. They're the places that need to match and join together. The raw edges don't. But as you can see, that's attached really easily. I haven't had to force that into place anywhere at all. I just worked around carefully, do my quarter points, my 8th points, and then working into the gaps in between. If you are new to this, or if you're using a more challenging fabric, you could even put on more pins than this, okay? Don't be ashamed by how many pins you put in there. Whatever you need to get a good finish, that's the right number for you. So once you've done that on one fabric, you need to take your second hat side and your second hat top and do the exact same thing. Then you need to sew them both using that same 10mm 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. A tip to remember as you're sewing your hat side to your hat top, if you're finding it challenging sewing those curves together, is that the whole thing doesn't need to be lying flat as you're sewing. The whole of the part that you're going to be sewing ahead of you, that doesn't need to be lying flat. The only bit that needs to be lying flat is the section that you're doing. So if you look here, it doesn't matter that this bit here isn't sitting flat, or that another bit round here might be looking a bit bunched. I am sewing from where my needle is in the machine until this orange pin here. I will then stop, take the orange pin out, and then rearrange and make sure that this next section to the green pin is sitting flat. So don't worry if it seems to be a bit challenging because it looks wrinkled as you go around. You are only sewing a tiny section at a time, and only the bit that's actually going under your needle needs to be flat. The rest of it you can move and manipulate as you get to it. You should now have 2 hat tops, and just as we did with the brim, we need to clip notches into this seam that you've just sewn to help it sit nicely and for that curve to be smooth. This one, if I'm honest, is slightly less vital than the one on the brim. It's still definitely recommended to get the best finish. But if you don't have pinking shears and cutting all of those notches into the seams drove you to distraction, this is the one that you can skip, not the one on the brim. The brim is essential. This one is just strongly recommended. So you make your own choice here. So the next step is to attach your hat top to your hat brim. You need to turn your outer hat top so that it's the right way out, so that you're looking at the right side of the fabric. And I'm choosing to use the Minecraft fabric here as my outer fabric. And I need to place my brim so that the Minecraft fabric is facing the Minecraft fabric, so that the outer fabrics are right sides facing. And I'm going to match up the side seam on my brim. I'll place that here so you can see it. These are the side seams where I joined the brim pieces together. I'm going to match them to the side seams on my hat top. So I have Minecraft facing Minecraft, and I have side seams facing side seams. And I'm going to pin those together. Next, that you should have marked a little double notch on both your brim along this inside edge and along the bottom of your hat top. So you need to find those double notches, match them, and pin them also. Now, just as we did with the hat top, you're going to go to the center point between 2 pins and find that and join that, and then the center point between these 2 pins and pin there. Once you've done that, go to each pair of pins again, center point and pin it, center point and pin it. It takes a minute to do this, but it really does help you when you're sewing to have it smoothly joined and have lots of pins to hold it securely in place. And as with the top, you may need to ease your fabric a little to join those curves together, but you should not have to stretch it, and it should fit properly. So there you can see I've attached the whole of my brim to my hat top. A little tip for you if you are a beginner and you are finding this step tricky. On the brim there are 2 layers, and as you're pinning it, they may move about. So if you're finding that, take the brim off and do a basting stitch. That's a long straight stitch as close to the raw edge as you can just on your brim, and that will hold those 2 layers together, and so it'll feel like you're just working with 1 layer for the brim. So that's just a little tip if you're finding that step difficult, but otherwise you're now ready to sew your brim onto your hat outer. So again, it's a 10mm 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and you're going to sew all the way around. So we have something here that's starting to look a lot like a hat, but we still have a whole heap of raw edges in the middle, so we need to get them covered. You need to take your hat lining that you've already created, and place that wrong side out. So the wrong side of the fabric is facing you, the raw edges are right there. And you're going to place it down so that it looks like a little bowl that's facing you there. You're then going to take the hat that you've just sewn and just crunch it up a little bit. Okay, you want to keep all of these raw edges facing upwards, but you just need to reduce the size of it a little. And you're going to place that inside the hat outer that's looking like a bowl. And then you need to find your side seams and you need to match them up with the side seams on your hat outer. And then again, you need to find that double notch that you should have on both your hat lining piece and your main hat. And you need to match up those double notch pieces on each side. And I'm sure you know what's coming now. We are going to take the center point between two pins, place a pin, center point, place a pin, go around, and then do it again. Center point, find a pin, center point, place a pin, so that you've attached the whole of the hat that you've already created to this last hat top lining. So I've now attached my main hat to my hat top lining and pinned all around that top raw edge. In a minute, I'm going to go and again sew around that top edge using a 10mm 3/8 inch seam allowance. I can actually use the line of stitching that's already there as a guide and just follow that. However, you must not sew all the way around in a complete circle because you will not be able to turn your hat the right way out. You need to leave a turning hole. How big a turning hole is up to you. If you're using a lighter fabric, it can be slightly smaller. If you're using a heavier fabric, it needs to be slightly bigger. You just need to be able to get this whole hat through that hole. So I'm going to say at least a 5cm, 2 inches turning hole is a good idea. Now, you may have your own method for remembering to leave a turning hole, but I like to place a pin in the opposite direction to all my other pins. So all my pins here are vertical, but I've placed one horizontal pin here. So when I get to this pin, I know that I need to stop and I don't continue along and I don't remove that pin. So you need to sew around the top now, but leave a turning hole big enough for you to turn the whole hat out. So I have now sewn around the entire top edge of my hat, except for where this blue pin is, and I've left that as my turning hole. And then this is the fun part. You get to turn your hat inside out and see what you have made. And there we have one hat. It is looking extremely crumpled. And so strange as it feels, especially to me as someone who very rarely irons their clothing, you need to go and give this a good press, okay? It wouldn't normally press a hat, but this one has been all screwed up inside and turned out and it is all crumpled. So you want to go away and give it a good press. And then the last thing you're going to need to do is close this turning hole here, okay? Because at the moment I've still got a hole where my hat was turned out. So I need to close that up. You have two options. You can either close it using an invisible stitch or a slip stitch, and I will drop a link into a little video that I've done showing you how to do that, and that will give you an invisible finish, and then you're done. The other option is to top stitch just above this seam all the way around, okay? And it will look lovely and neat because it's a nice top stitch all the way around, but it will have the added bonus of closing this hole up for you. So I am going to top stitch this one after I have pressed it. And here is my finished hat. So I have top stitched around this top edge here, which I just think gives it a nice finish, but it also has the added bonus of it closed my turning hole. And I have given it a press. To be honest, I do not have the patience to be the world's best presser, but it looks a little better and a little less crumpled than it did. And it is now ready. I'm just waiting for the Albany sunshine to come out, which it has not done today, but hopefully it will get used soon. I hope you found this useful, and please like and subscribe to make sure you're always the first to know when a new video is posted.